Honeybound. How do you explain that or describe that? Anybody in the panel?
Well,
I'll
I'll
take that one. I'll take that one first, Charlie, because I think my view is different than everybody else's. I don't think honeybound exists. I think it's an artificial condition presented by the beekeeper just due to mismanagement of nectar storage within the colony. Bees know where they're going to put the honey and how to put it there, and ultimately, if we don't give them that space, they're going to put it in a lot of places. But we also have to look at time of year too. I at least hear it often during swarm season that a colony is honey bound, and there's nowhere for that new queen to lay. And it's quite the opposite. The bees will actually move that honey in and out as needed. It's kind of just a big pantry for them. So, in my personal opinion, I don't think honey bound is a condition that the bees make. It's a condition that beekeepers make, and that's usually just it's a result of. I'll use the word mismanagement, and I don't mean that in a harsh way. Just that we're not staying on top of what the bees actually need.
So essentially what it's talking about though is there's so much honey in the hive that the queen doesn't have room to lay eggs. So
right.
Yes.
So the remedy is to put a super on. Is that correct? Or not?
Or take some honey out.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, bees will move it. So, as beekeepers, we tend to react rather than be proactive. So, by the time it gets to honey bound, I mean, that honey bound is going to cause, that state that we call honey bound is normal in a healthy colony. And that's what's one of the prompts, the condition that causes swarming, is this increase in nectar flow. Oftentimes, again, we react rather than be proactive. So if we see it and then put the super on, it's often too late because then the colony has already swarmed, etc. So the whole idea behind, that is just to add supers prior to them getting to the spot where they've added too much honey. I do a lot of single brood chamber management, and one of the comments we often get is, they must swarm a lot because they backfill all that brood nest with honey, and it's quite the opposite. We tend to swarm less because we're giving them all that additional space. So yes, it's a condition caused by increased nectar flow, but if we stay ahead of our bees, it's usually a non-issue. And then in the fall, it's definitely a non-issue because we want all that honey to be in there, and that's not technically honey bound. That's winter prep.
Now, one common misconception that new beekeepers have is that a super is just a box with frames in it. Anyone who's had more than 2 years of experience with beekeeping knows that the true value isn't even bees, it's the comb, being used from season to season or replenished, letting them draw out new comb. Because if they don't have comb to put that honey in, then that's where the emergency comes in, and that's when they start wanting to swarm. So right. The number one resource is empty comb to be able to be put on there so that we can get that honey off and put it back on and keep them happy where they are instead of someone else's tree.
Which is a good point, CC. And there's a product out there now made by Better Bee called Better Comb that is fantastic for newer beekeepers, that if you need drawn comb now, it's a synthetic wax essentially. So, pick up, it's expensive. It's, $10 a sheet, but it does give you that flexibility. So yeah, drawn comb is important to beekeepers all over.
Yeah, comb is golden. That leads into the next question. What signs should you look for to put it on your supers in the spring when in regard to spring prep? I usually use a date. I use an arbitrary date. I use tax day, April 15th. Once I see dandelions popping, or even before that, I put it on. What does the panel think?
Probably wait till probably at least dandelion. I like it the air temperature to be warm most of the time during the days because it still helps the bees control some temperature. But there's not a lot to gain nectar wise before dandelion, which rolls right into apple blossom.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Dandelion, April 1st, dandelions, depending on the weather. Again, that's being proactive instead of reactive. And, tying this all to swarming and nectar management, you need to make sure those bees have workable and usable space prior to them needing it. It's that adding those supers on, especially if it's undrawn foundation. If you have foundation that's brand new, get it on there earlier so that they can draw it out as soon as that nectar flow starts kicking in. Otherwise, if they don't have usable space, they're going to put that nectar elsewhere, which is usually the brood nest, and that's going to cause problems. So yeah, I use dandelions. That's a good environmental indicator all over the state, depending.
I have a little different take on it. Both Charlie and Steve are commercial, and they have 100+ colonies. I have under 40 normally, and that's where I am very happy to be. I am a hobbyist and proud of it. And honestly, I don't take off all the honey in the fall. I leave boxes and boxes out there. They get crystallized, and I want them to work that. So I pretty much put the half crystallized honey that has not been eaten on those colonies that are growing before they're bringing their own stuff, so they can pull everything out, feed on it, clear them out, and then they have it going forward. So I'm not doing any guesswork on when they need it. I give it to them early and let them do the clean out and prep. So
you're actually letting them utilize that early on for consumption, but then you have the drawn comb available.
Exactly.
Versus Charlie and I and many others, we just have the drawn comb in storage. And it's similar. You're still giving them that storage. You're just providing them food versus we're providing them space.
Right, because I don't have places and I don't really have a place set up for the drawn comb, off the colonies. I have to improve that in my own work process. But I have found that with my style of doing it, my style of management, there does come a time that they totally ignore the crystallized honey. They're like, well, forget this. They'll start, building, I'll give them fresh comb to start building off of, or fresh space. I'm foundationless for the most part. So I make sure that I work with 10 frame boxes, but the 1 in 10 position is just the empty frame. So I see them starting to build those off, ignoring the space I've given them. I know I have to pull that out. I actually put it in a side yard so they can rob out of it. And when they rob it, then they pull all the crystals out and they make it usable. Then I can put it back in, because there is a time when the flow starts going strong, they'll ignore the crystallized honey. They'll be like, forget this. They'll go somewhere else. So I'm in risk of actually creating a swarm if I don't manage it correctly. So I do have to be on top of that.
To rewind here, Steve mentioned April 1st. You have to realize that Steve, even Charlie, and everybody in the panel is down south. They're not up on the lake, which means if you're in the lake area, we're about 2 weeks behind that Pittsburgh, Grove City area. So that would put it April 1st. I would put it around the 15th. But you'll look for those signs, and particularly that the silver maple will be coming out, but that dandelion is one of the key signs to be sure your supers are on. Next question.
Let me make one more suggestion with because I feed anything that the dead outs, all that honey, most of that honey goes on to other hives to help feed them through the spring. But with crystallized honey, you can get them to remove that. If you open those cells, if you damage it, you take a comb fork across it, the bees don't tolerate open cells. They'll do something with it. So they'll clean it out of there a little quicker if you open it up.
Yep.
Just a suggestion.
That's a great point. Real good point.
There was a question, just backing up a little bit, from Charlie Hefner. He said, if I have rocky soil, can laying a ground rod in a trench work? I've never tried laying it in a trench.
I don't think so. I think if it's rocky soil, you got to drive. You need a longer rod and deeper, because you got to get to that moisture. Yeah. It's the same way with the dry soils.
Yeah. The other solution that I've done in tough conditions is take chicken wire, 2-foot wide chicken wire, and lay it around the perimeter of the yard on the outside, and kind of tag it to the ground with big wire staples. You can make them, but so the animal's essentially standing on the chicken wire when it touches the fence.
Now,
so you can put your ground right to that.
Do you spray, Charlie, to keep the grass down in that area? Because once the grass grows up, I wouldn't see that being effective.
No, because that chicken wire is right near the surface. So usually some of it's exposed. It gets rusty after years, but I know it. I had one particular yard where I had bear get through it regardless. And it was mostly because it had dry leaves on the ground. And once I put that chicken wire around that perimeter, I've, knock on wood, not have had a bear go back through it again.
Mike.
Even though I found bear crap on the outside. So I know they're there.
Mike, do you have any answer to that about rocky ground?
The chicken wire is good. The other thing is if you're doing wires and you have multiple wires, is you make every other wire a hot wire and every other wire is connected directly to your ground. Then you don't have to have a ground rod at all. Mm-hmm. When they put their head through two wires, they're grounded. They're zapped.
Okay. I have a question for the panel from Mark Anderholt. As the progresses, do you under soup? This is for a single brood management. Do you under super or over super?
Yes.
Which way?
Yes, both. It
Both?
all depends on what I have available. If I have, if I'm using John Comb, I'll just over super. If the flow is slow or I'm using foundation, I'll under super, or I should say bottom super. Mm-hmm. So we clarify those terms too. There's over supering, undering supering, and top and bottom supering. Over supering, I know to basically mean add a whole lot more supers than you need. Under super meaning add less than you need, versus top and bottom supering. Top supering is just putting supers right on top. Bottom supering is putting supers underneath your next super up. So I definitely add a lot more supers than I think I'll need initially, but when I'm adding additional supers, if I'm adding undrawn foundation, I'm going to bottom super. So I'm going to take the super that's there first, lift it off, put my clean foundation on so they violate that bee space and draw out comb. Or if I think there's not a super strong flow, a lot of times you'll find that they ignore those supers up top. So I'll continue to bottom super to make them work that a little bit better. So a lot of variations to that theme.
Okay. Back to the old question during spring prep when you do your first inspection and such, which could be coming up if we have a long program, long section of 60, 70 degree weather. Do you reverse? This would be for having two brood boxes. What's the benefit of reversing it or just leaving them the same, or will they just go back down by themselves? Any opinions here?
I don't know. I've done it both ways. The bees seem to like those upper boxes early in the spring when it's still cold. So I don't like reversing them until the weather warms up. And then I do it just if I need to. Sometimes I'll just move frames of bees down below and just start to checkerboard with the empty combs just to spread the brood nest out. I don't like to break the brood nest up a lot because they do need that a lot of bees, at least in the center 3 frames, to just produce brood. I don't want to interrupt that too much, but again, probably dandelion is still the kind of the marker when the season is really rolling, and you can do some reverses, but it works. I don't use it exclusively. I'd use it sometimes.
CICI, I know you're going to say something. CICI, you're on.
Pretty much the same thing that Charlie said, honestly. I mean, I get hot to trot and get out there and just want to do something, and I've managed to kill off some bees that way. But I've also had them flourish. So I mean, it's pretty hard to say. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of at a point where it's hands off is probably better, I mean, if you're not giving a definite beneficial boost to your bees, leave them the heck alone is kind of my thought at this point. But sometimes we're beekeepers for a reason. We don't, I mean, at least the hobbyists here, we're not in, we're real low workload hobby here. This is very intensive. We're hands-on people. Sometimes it's hard to keep these things off.
Good. I'm not asking Steve because he only uses one.
Well, I'll tell you, I only use one now, but Charlie and CiCi nailed it. Is we tend to a lot of what we do is based on traditional and historical literature, right? And reversing hive bodies was a way of quote unquote minimizing swarming, and and as we're finding out, the bees, that one, it doesn't really minimize swarming. If anything, as CiCi said, you kill off a lot of colonies by doing things too early. So the other argument here is that you have to reverse because bees won't move down. Well, my response is, I don't know how many big feet we have in Pennsylvania, but nobody's out there rotating trees in the wild. Bees move up, they move back down. They move up, they move back down. So it's just a matter of time. The bees know what they're doing, and temperature has a lot to do with it. They're not going to lay down low where it's cooler. So, why rotate that and risk chilling brood?
That's a good answer. Really good answer. Back to Mike. This is another question about fencing. Mike, what do you recommend for lightning protection on the fence charger?
Well, there's some commercial solutions to it. I don't do any of them. I've only know that I've been hit once, and that was almost 20 years ago. There's some, what you do is you put in a drain on the corner of your fence that goes to a ground wire. And supposedly when you get hit, it's supposed to drain out. Some of the newer chargers have some lightning protection built into them. But like I said, I don't do anything. And maybe that's why I replace a charger every few years, but I don't know.